Hi, I'm having a fairly productive day. I've had my 24th blood donation today. I've also signed up for some medical survey related to that, which is pretty straightforward. So yeah, it feels like a fairly productive day. Um, so Canada is going to the polls. It's an early election called by Justin Trudeau. I haven't followed it in great detail, but there is one aspect that I want to focus on. It's a report that I came across. And I want to focus on that. But before getting into that, just a disclaimer. I say this with every election I cover in these videos. Obviously, it's up to the Canadians to decide their government and their Prime Minister. I'm an outsider. I'm not Canadian. I'm not telling anyone what who to vote for or anything like that. I'm not interfering in that sense. But I think Canada's a great country and I wish it all the best. Of course, I'm interested because I feel that what happens in one Western democracy can have implications more broadly. And although Canada may not have the same plight as the United States, it is still a great nation. From that point of view, tying into what I'm going to be talking about here, I will be paying attention to what happens. Um, in the end, it's going to be really down to two men. It's going to be Justin Trudeau or Aaron O'Toole, just because of the maths. I know there's others. Jagmeet Singh has quite an impact from what I gather on the polls, but I do think in the end it is going to be either re-election for Trudeau or a victory for the Conservatives under Aaron O'Toole. I have to say I know nothing about the man. I might watch some of the election debate coverage, but it's very extensive, so might not watch all of that. But I can't comment on Aaron O'Toole. I don't know anything about him other than he's the Tory leader. Justin Trudeau, kind of the woke prince. I'm not a huge fan of Trudeau on the grounds that some of the rhetoric he comes out with and some of his pandering to woke ideology is just ridiculous. But again, I'm an outsider. It's up to Canadians. Um, However, Justin Trudeau is right about one thing. When he accused Beijing of engaging in hostage diplomacy, he's absolutely right about that. That is what China is doing, and it's disgraceful. What I'm going to read out here really ties into that. I might not read the whole article because it's quite lengthy, but basically, if you just bear with me. Now, this is involving an MP by the name of Kenny Chua, and the op-ed is by Daphne Bramham for the Vancouver Sun. If you just bear with me, I'll try and read out the gist of this, the main points. Daphne Bramham, Conservatives face ugly barrage over party's China policy. This is an opinion piece by Daphne Bramham. When MP Kenny Chua introduced his private members bill last April, he knew it had little chance of becoming law. Private members bills rarely do. But Chua's proposal for a Foreign Agent Registry Act signalled the Conservative Party's position that Canada needs a much tougher China policy. The bill, C-282, would require current and former politicians and civil servants working on behalf of foreign governments to register if they're attempting to influence or change Canadian laws or policies or attempting to influence who gets government grants and contracts. Seems sensible to me. Seems like a very fair bill. Nothing extreme about that. Chua knew that it would make him an even bigger target in Steveston, Richmond East, a riding with one of the highest percentages of ethnic Chinese people in Canada. It's a riding he'd won in 2019 by 2,747 votes. In April, he'd been sanctioned by China for his role as deputy chair of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights, which determined that China's treatment of Muslim minority Uyghurs fit the UN's definition of genocide. With the kind of regime that I'm engaging with, it would be unrealistic not to expect an attack coming from there, Chua said. It's also not the first time I'm engaging with them. There had been social media attacks in 2019, but Chua said they were more subtle, but still enough that he was advised to increase security at his home. Let that sink in for a second. This is a Canadian MP who has had to increase security in his own house because of potential threats from the Chinese state. That's abhorrent. Um, Now, what's interesting, I'm not going to read out the whole article because it's quite long and I don't want to lose the video, but basically, what we're seeing and what the report is focusing on is the fact that Chinese state media, coupled with Chinese social media sites like Weixin and Sina Weibo and others, are stating false information about this bill. So, for example, they're saying that this will demonize the entire Chinese community. This is a story in Today Commercial News, um, saying that people need to spread the word that the bill would suppress the Chinese community. So this is scaremongering. That story falsely said that if enacted, the bill would deem as an agent of the Chinese government anyone who's a member of clan societies, went to events hosted by them, anyone who attends events hosted by the Chinese consulate, joins alumni association, receives any sponsorship from the Chinese government, its agencies, or state-owned enterprises and companies whose executives members of the Chinese Communist Party of the Communist Party of China. Now, some of that would be vague because an elected politician could be invited to the Chinese embassy for some sort of bilateral event, and that doesn't mean they're a foreign agent. So if that was actually the case, maybe it would be poorly defined. But the point about this is it's a lie. It's a lie stoked up by the Chinese state in order to demonize Kenny Chua personally, but also the Conservatives and Erin O'Toole. Um, this is what's happening. It's absolutely repulsive. Um, some of the posts against Erin O'Toole are really strongly worded. One is Canada's Donald Trump. Well, that's. But another one basically calls him vomit because the surname sounds similar to that in Mandarin. Um, some posts describe the Conservatives as racist, and with some reason. Over the weekend, O'Toole dumped the Toronto candidate when years-old Islamophobic tweets resurfaced. Well, Islamophobia and racism. Incidentally, I don't know what the political angle of the Vancouver Sun is. So, but another Nova Scotia candidate who tweeted similar things more recently is being allowed to stay on. Others disparage O'Toole, Chua, and the party as being pro-Hong Kong, anti-China, and fueling anti-Asian racism. One long Wishun post mischaracterizes Chu's bill, saying that every single group and many individuals within the mainland Chinese community can be defined by this bill as an extension of the Chinese government or an agent assignee of the Beijing government. He offered falsely claims to conservatives to ban all popular social media apps widely used by mainland Chinese, including WeChat, QQ, Weibo, Xiaohongshu, and Alipay. I don't know Xiaohongshu, I know the other ones. A WeChat writer says China is the motherland of all Chinese. Please vote for the Liberals. By showing the power of the Chinese, we could have a chance to influence the future of Canada and create a good life for all of us. That's typical of thuggish nationalism coming from coming from nationalistic quarters. Now, whoever wrote that, I don't know if they're a mainland Chinese kind of interfering, or if they're a Canadian Chinese who's basically sympathetic to Beijing. And this is something I want to tap into. Over the last year, with coronavirus, there has unfortunately been a rise in hate crimes against Asians or people who are of Asian ethnicity in the United States, in Canada, in Australia, and in the UK, and in continental Europe. That's true. That has been a problem, and it's a terrible thing. Nobody should be harassed because of their ethnicity. But there is a very, very dangerous distortion going on. And I think that China apologists, that is, Chinese government apologists, and communist agents are deliberately fueling this misconception that being critical of the CCP and being critical of the Chinese regime equates to anti Asian racism. This is a dangerous, dangerous distortion because it means like that parliamentarians like Kenny Chua and others, if they speak out against these thugs, then they're in his case he's called a traitor because he's an ethnic Chinese man, even though he's a Canadian citizen, even though he's an elected Canadian parliamentarian, he's being slammed as a traitor to his motherland. Um, I think there needs to be more blunt language. I think people need to decide where their loyalties lie. And if let's say you have a Chinese national living in Canada, they are constantly supporting the Chinese government and constantly advocating for the Chinese government and engaging in nationalistic displays. They cannot whine about being associated with the Chinese government. This is something you see often with Chinese students. They will say, "Oh, we're not the government, don't attack us." But then, by the very same token, they get very nationalistic and defensive. And I'm sick of it. I'm sick of their arrogance. This is not just a problem in Canada, it's a serious problem in this country. Hong Kong students have been violently threatened on British university campuses by mainland Chinese students. And to be honest, this isn't a new thing. It's been going on at least since the Beijing Olympics in '08. Um, I think there's people who will be ideologically opposed to the Conservatives. And by the way, I'm not here to advocate domestic politics of the Canadian Conservative Party. I'm not a conservative. Probably there's areas I would disagree with them on. But when it comes to China, I think this is something that has to go beyond party politics. The Liberals and the New Democratic Party and the Bloc Québécois and so on, they need to see the bigger picture. China is no friend of the West. The Chinese government is hostile to the West and is particularly hostile to Canada. So if Justin Trudeau's party is deemed to be weak, and again, that's not for me to say, but if it's deemed to be weak, and if it's this notion that he will be soft on China, so let's vote for him, that's extremely dangerous to Western democracy. There should be absolutely no way that Beijing and its tentacles are allowed to interfere in the Canadian democratic process, or the American democratic process, or the British democratic process, or the Australian democratic process, or any other democracy that they try to interfere in. For a regime that loves to talk about this is our internal affairs, they have no problem stoking up nationalism abroad. Um, Now, I accept that it wouldn't be easy to just ban Chinese social media because, well, firstly, there'd be reprisals and, all Canadian media would be banned in China. Also, you'd be cutting off links that people might have with the families and so on. However, I do think that there is a very dangerous mentality, and I think this is a problem in Canada of political correctness. Oh, we can't say that because it might be deemed racist. Come on, Canada, toughen up. Talking here about those Canadians who think it's racist to criticize the CCP. Have some pride. This is an external threat. I just think it's staggering that there are Canadians who cannot see this. I'm not just talking about Canada here. Um, like I say, it's happening in Britain as well. You have British university academics who are happy to take money from the Chinese regime in exchange for telling students to have to be silent about the Uyghurs. Um, this new pact between Australia, the United States, and the UK, some of our Western powers are not too happy about it because they say it excludes them. Um, the only person that benefits from rifts in the West is the Chinese dictatorship. I want to see them polarized. I want them to be seen as the rogue regime that they are. China's peaceful rise is a facade because this aggressive maritime expansionism in the Pacific threatens Japan, it threatens the Philippines, it threatens Taiwan. Um, at some point, the world needs to stand up to Beijing because what you have is a regime that thinks it can do as it pleases. I actually think it's partly motivated by ideology. So, for example, I keep looking back to the century of humiliation, i.e., when China was exploited and humiliated, let's face it, by the great powers, plus Japan. Well, Japan was a great power, but the Western great powers in Japan. And I feel it's kind of this vindictive sense of we're now powerful, we're going to get our own back, and we're going to throw our weight around. This will be controversial, but I feel that if a Chinese national wants to settle in the West, they need to prove that their loyalty lies to the West. And, let's say I was a parliamentarian and I tried to introduce a bill like that, I would immediately be denounced as a racist. But realistically, we need to look at what's going on here. The experiences that this MP has had being called a traitor, getting threats, having to increase security in his home. That's absolutely disgusting. No Canadian parliamentarian should have to face that. Why? Because they're democratic elect, they're the representatives of the people. You might not like them on their politics, but that's democracy. So um, I hope that whatever the result is tonight, um, it's not one that will please Beijing. Um, I don't like Justin Trudeau's wokeism, but I do think that he was right to say that China isn't, excuse me, China is engaging in hostage diplomacy. And the idea that the Chinese embassy, Chinese government can stoke up its diaspora to talk about, who to vote for in the sense of who is pro or anti-China is grotesque. I can understand the Chinese community having concerns about things like hate crimes, but that should be seen as a different issue. So, for example, if there's a large Chinese community in Toronto or Vancouver or other major cities, and they say this is the issue that's affecting us, then a parliamentarian needs to address their concerns. That's understandable. But if some of those individuals are saying we demand that you take a soft line with China, I think that is grotesque. And they need to decide where their loyalties are. Frankly, they need to decide are they Canadian citizens or not? And if they're Canadian citizens, then why are they advocating for a soft approach to a hostile foreign government? Because I think, there's no contradiction in maintaining your Chinese heritage and, celebrating Chinese New Year and all of that. But as far as I'm concerned, if you advocate for the Chinese government, if you act as an apologist for them, if you attack democracy by threatening elected representatives, then do not whine about being seen as a CCP stooge, because that's what you are. You may say, oh, I'm not part of the government. But if you're acting like a stooge, that's what you are. I've seen this mentality with a lot of Chinese students. I shouldn't say a lot, some, where they say, we're not part of the Chinese government. And that's probably true. They're not employed by the Chinese government. Probably the communication fairly minimal. But I do believe there is evidence that the Chinese embassies, respective embassies, are stoking up nationalism via state media, which is extremely jingoistic. I do think there is evidence that Chinese students have engaged in bullying and threatening behaviour. In the case of this country, I think it's absolutely disgraceful that our universities are so weak. I think that Chinese students who engage in that behaviour should immediately be kicked out of the university and deported. Because if they're in this country and they're behaving like that, I mean, think if the tables were turned. Think if a British national behaved that way in China. Do you think they'd get a, second chance? No way. Absolutely no way. Summed up, I think we need to robustly, by we, I'm talking about everyone who loves freedom and democracy, need to robustly tackle this distortion, this lie that people who favour a hardline approach to Beijing are somehow xenophobes, that they are against ordinary Chinese people, that they're somehow promoting racism. This is a dangerous lie, and it needs to be challenged robustly. They need to be, made to look like the fools that they are for making that argument. But it's a very sinister thing that you have a Canadian MP being threatened in his own home, or at least having to increase security in his own home. For what? For standing up for Canadian values. Even if people don't agree with that policy, that bill, criticise him, but don't threaten him. Um, and do not say that it's racist to talk about taking a hard line with an aggressive foreign government. That's delusional. How is that racist? So, I love Canada, and I just hope that it's up to Canadians. I'm not telling anyone how to vote, but um, I really, really hope that whatever the decision is, it's not one that will please Beijing.